Welcome to Real Talk with Tina and Ann. I am Ann, and we have Denise Bard back for this episode. This is an interesting one because the first time I heard the difference between attention seeking versus connection seeking, it literally stopped me in my thoughts. I would have said that I was an attention-seeking individual after my dad passed away. My sister was also given to the system, and my adopted mom took me on a 6-week trip to God knows where, all over the place. And it was just a really crazy time for me. I know I was an attention-seeking person. Denise, you and I talked about how I felt like I
Yeah.
was an alien in my own body and I became a completely different person after that. I oftentimes say how, time was split. It was cut in half between before my dad and after my dad. I know for a fact that people, the adults in the room, would have called me for sure the attention seeker. I was craving for someone to pay attention to me, but back then there was no term for seeking connection. They just didn't talk like that back then. It was if you either needed attention, period. You are that person. You're that kid. Bad behaviors were just that. You were labeled. You were
hmm
the negative term in the classroom, and I felt it. I wore it. I did weird things. I did not do horrible things. I wasn't that person. But
hmm
I did drink and I snuck alcohol into the building and I hid it in the bathroom. I did things like purposely try to get the attention of adults. And, it wasn't anything horrible. I think I've told this story before, but, like I wanted the attention of this teacher and she was dating this guy who was also a teacher. And so I snuck into her room and I think I was like in 10th or 10th grade. And I snuck into her room when nobody was in there and I poured a bunch of condoms on her desk.
Well,
You know, it was fun and I just like to do kind of goofy things. She walked in, we're all sitting there and she's like, "Who did this?" It's like, you. I mean,
yeah.
I don't even think she ever blamed me for that. I don't think I got caught. But I just like to have fun because I'm an ornery person. I'm not a bad person.
hmm
And so that's kind of how I sought it out. But I also did things because I really did honestly want connection. There was a teacher that I connected with in 7th grade, and I just liked her. Like, it kind of gave me this mom vibe. And I just wanted connection with her. And one day we were talking about math, and I was weird. I said that I liked her. And I didn't know how to explain to her that I liked her, but it just came across really weird. And I think she
Yeah.
always thought I was weird after that. I was
Yeah.
an autistic individual who just couldn't really put the words together sometimes to try to say what I was saying. And I would talk in pieces, parts, and people would have to try
Yeah.
to figure it out. So, after that, she kind of stayed away from me. Um,
Yeah.
and I end up, running away to a person's house,
hmm
and it was a teacher. I was just looking for help. My life was so bad at the time, and I was just looking for some kind of help. I think back then we didn't have all the things that we have in place now for kids. I know that that's true. Kids who were attention seekers were just that. Like I said, they were
Yeah.
annoying and looked down on by adults and just expected to straighten up. And the adults in the room know that there is more to the story. There are so many kids with one parent homes and recognized abuse. It's known.
Mhm.
Maybe they're in the foster care or
Yeah.
whatever, but we know that they've been abused. So much used to be swept under the rug. No one ever thought these are kids that are hurting and they are not having their needs fulfilled. Honestly, I think that adults just expected kids, and I know that adults just expected kids to act like the adults wanted them to.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love this episode because this is a topic that really hits home. Um, as you know, like I wrote the book, The 30-Second Moments and the Women Who Raised Me. The
Right.
30-second moments, and of course, like I speak, I go to
Mm-hmm.
schools and I speak to educators. And when I explain a 30-second moment, I said a 30-second moment is when a connection is made that goes unnoticed by them, these adults, these educators,
Mm-hmm.
but will be forever remembered. But most importantly, felt by these kids. And this feeling echoes long after the moment has passed, because it is those connections. So when I look back at my own life and going through the traumas and the abuses similarly to you, where it was like you were looking for this parent, like not to get the attention of these teachers. It was more like wanting that connection with them. And then you were
Yes.
talking about how you were that kid, that bad kid. Well, in elementary school, I wasn't a bad kid. Like I didn't get in trouble except for talking. And I always say, like when I'm speaking at schools, I'm like, I'm just preparing myself for this. You know what I mean? I was a
Mm-hmm.
but I will say, come middle school, when I had to move in with my mother full time when I was 12, I was going into the sixth grade. And from sixth to eighth grade, it progressively got worse. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't, and I say this in the speech, I wasn't a bad kid. I was
Mm-hmm.
a hurt kid hiding behind bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I just spoke at a school a couple weeks ago, and it was a middle school where I had this counselor, Mrs. Kessler. She's now Miss Boyd now. She actually came to hear me speak, and it was first time she really heard everything. Um, but when I think back to her and when I was discussing this in the when I talk about this, I always said, when I was doing these activities, like getting in trouble for arguing, then I was fighting, and then all this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I would end up doing that so that I would be called down to her office. And it
Oh,
wasn't because
interesting.
I wasn't looking for that attention. Every time I was with her, I felt a connection with her. Like it was this
Okay.
connection of, I always felt safe in her presence. In my mind, she saw the hurting kid that was always meant to be hidden inside. That was what was in my mind.
See.
And so you go in there looking for that kind of connection. And it's the same thing. It was like these
Mm-hmm.
these teachers for me were these temporary moms. And so when you're looking
Mm-hmm.
for that kind of relationship, it isn't an intention. It is all about that connection because that's the desire, at least that I had, you know?
Well, connection is a basic need. And,
Right.
we don't really even talk about that. But, you need the food, the water, the shelter. But connection is one of those basic needs that we have to reach our full potential.
Yeah, and especially I think especially for those of us who have experienced trauma,
Hmm.
as kids, when you're in that developmental stage,
Oh my gosh.
we need that. And when you don't get it, you get to the adult age and you're so like um
Now what?
yeah, and it's like, you know what? And I think we've had this conversation before too, where even as adults, we were looking for that connection as well. Like it doesn't, it
Sure.
hadn't healed or whatever. And
I
I'm in
mean,
therapy right now for all of this because I realize I'm like, oh
yeah.
gosh, it's like you're even, it doesn't matter how old you are. I like truly, truly believe in this. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter how old you are, you still have that craving for a connection with, we'll say, in a parent role. I have to talk about, my own like feelings. It's like you just crave that. And when you don't have it, you're going through mourning.
I, I honestly just think that we're all built for connection. That's what
Hmm.
we're built for. I
Right.
mean, that was the way that we were wired. And, even God is three in one. And that was about relationship and he wanted connection with us. So we're all built for relationship.
Right.
When I used to work at the jail, the women every Christmas would turn in their list of kids who would not have a Christmas. And we would help fulfill those lists. We would go
Hmm.
to Toys for Tots and we would fill up our cars And, it was just one of the most joyful things that I love doing at Christmas. Giving I love giving more than receiving.
Hmm.
But, it was such a long list of kids who would not have anything for Christmas. And they were so grateful. And the other side of that was that there were no cards that would come in for dads.
Mm,
Isn't that interesting?
that is.
You know, there are so many women that are out there that are just doing it, and the
Yeah.
men just, and I'm not gonna, because there's a lot of men out there that are pulling their weight and they're maybe the single parent.
Yeah.
But I'm just telling you what I saw when I
Yeah.
was involved in the jails. And there are just so many one-parent households where
Hmm.
either side are doing it, working many jobs or just not there for whatever reason. I was that kid
Yeah.
whose mom had to work after my dad died. And I was 12 years old. I was letting myself in every day after school. I was by myself all day. From
Yeah.
the time that I got home and even Saturdays, I made my own dinner, which was an old school TV dinner, and I would do
Yeah.
my homework and I would not even call my friends because I had strict instructions not to do it. And I was too afraid of my mom to not listen. So I didn't even make a phone call. And I can't tell you how lonely I felt. I was that 12-year-old who did not have my rock, who was my dad, anymore.
Mhm.
My sister was gone, and it was a, it was just a nightmare that I was living in this house. The
Yeah.
only thing that was the same was my house, my bedroom, that kind of stuff. And my mom worked like 12-hour shifts because
Hmm.
she owned her own business and did very well, actually, very successful. And on Saturdays as well, like I said. So, it would be very late when she would get home, sometimes 6 days a week.
Yeah, I guess we, it's funny because I've been in my house right now, this house, since 2017, and it is the longest that I've ever lived in one house my entire life. And I'm 49. This is the first time.
Mm,
And so there was, growing up until I was 12, I was in kinship care and then back and forth with my mother. So there was no stability. You lose connection with people, because you're coming and going. You know, I was lucky and fortunate that I did from the time I was in kindergarten to fifth grade, except for one little episode. I stayed in my school, and that's where my
mm,
connections were made, is because that was mm, the only constant thing that I had. Do you know what I
mm,
mean? And
mm-hmm.
so, yeah, I kind of similar where you would come home and, well, I lived with my grandmother, so, for the most part, and she was kind of there, but when they weren't, it was you let yourself in, you let you whatever. There was a lack of everything at my,
Yeah.
it was just lacking, except for, like
Mm-hmm.
I said, school. School for me is where, um, was the only like thing that I constantly had every day. Outside of that,
Mm-hmm.
it was,
Mm-hmm.
the uncertainties of everything around you. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Talk about uncertainty. I was 12 years old, and I can remember I was sick one day. And I was in bed, my mom's bed actually, because she had the better room with the better TV. And our neighbors came in and started just cleaning all my dad's stuff out,
Mm, mm. That's
just
hard.
taking all of it. And I said, "That's my dad's." And they just said, "Well, your mom wanted us to take these out of
Ah,
here." You know, I mean, that was the thing. Nobody would stop to really just think that I was a person, a child who had just lost her father, and let's have a conversation. Let's
yeah.
see if you're okay. my mom never talked to me about my dad, I know I would have been difficult to have
Yeah.
that conversation. So it would have been easier for her not to do it. Um,
But maybe someone else.
yeah, I think that there were people that I probably would have let do have that conversation. Or even if you're the neighbor who's coming in to, maybe not do that in front of me. Maybe
Yeah.
if I'm homesick and I'm in the room, maybe not do it. But it was done so cold,
Hmm.
as if uh, it was just so matter of fact. It was, I don't know. Those kind of things were just so strange to me because I am so careful with my kids and
Yeah.
loss and how we handle it, and probably because of how it was handled with me. But I'm so cautious about how they experience it.
I've had things done where you're questioned like, do they see you? You're almost invisible,
Yeah.
So then, that brings again when you feel this and you're invisible,
Mm.
you
That's a great word.
we go back to this attention seeking and
Yeah.
feeling, you're looking for that connection. I think I wish people would talk to you about it. Because I
Yeah.
think if these adults would talk to you, they can understand or at least, have an idea of what's behind your actions, what's behind or what's making you do this or feel this way.
Mm.
You know what I mean? You're like you. I mean, when you're younger, you might not open up as much. Um,
Yeah.
but you hope the adults, kind of can see through. Like speaking recently and that counselor came, we had time to talk about this prior where she knew something wasn't right. And at that time, the only thing she can do is, she did call social services, but, you know, she, eh, she knew something wasn't right. Right. And so I felt like, again, there was some kind of a connection to me that I felt with her. She
Hmm.
didn't come out and say it, but it was almost like she understood
Hmm.
why I might have been choosing the things that I have done. But it was really apparent when I got to speak recently and she heard,
Mm.
exactly what I was doing and why I was doing it to be able to share with that
See,
person. Like,
what an amazing experience. It's just an incredible thing to have your teacher be able to sit out there and hear what you were doing.
oh yeah, and I've been fortunate so far. The last two schools that I had gone to, and I'm trying to, these were back in my district, so I was traveling up to New Jersey to speak to the two of the schools that I was at. Of course, everybody's
Hmm.
retired, but some of them actually had these teachers that I had too. But both schools, I had one person come that. I write in my book about these teachers and specific teachers and those
Hmm.
teachers actually came back to listen. And so I think when people don't understand the whole topic of attention versus connection, you do automatically say that's the kid who gets in trouble. That's the kid who's driving this person.
Well, I didn't know how to seek for the connection, so it
Hmm.
came out in behaviors in weird ways. So
Yeah.
like I was so quiet, especially after my dad died, and I would act out with behaviors and look at a teacher for help in, like I said, the strangest ways. It
Yep.
was just negative. It just came across negative, and all I wanted was connection with someone, anyone, to say,
Yeah.
"Can I help you? Are
Yeah.
you okay?" I mean, "Are you okay?" would have been
Yeah.
a great 3 words. Are you okay? That's
Less than
all I
30
needed to type
seconds.
in. That's
Yep. And
all.
less
Yeah.
than 30 seconds. That's it too. It's like, you know, when a kid has somebody, even an adult, even today, as we, are the age we are, I know there are some times where it's like, I just want a connection with someone different than your husband. I mean, well, for me, my husband, I think we have connections with different people, but
Hmm.
when you're lacking in certain areas, like you did with the person or the teacher that were looking at as a mom. Oh my God, whew, man, I have this one teacher that I think like I think she doesn't want to be near me or come out of the woodwork, has not come to the school, has not, addressed, she read the book, but she's never responded. And I think it
Mm,
was based upon this communication of me not being able to express to her in my mind, like, how do I get her to understand it was connection, not a attention seeking. I wasn't seeking
mm.
your attention. I was seeking this. But like you said, like, I think she kind of, I don't know, she disappeared. And I know a lot of people were telling her about, because I've been to these schools, oh, we can't wait to tell her. I'm like, no, I think I've communicated in not so dire. I mean, you just don't know how to do it. Even as adults, we don't know necessarily how to make the connections. At least I don't think.
Well, one of the things that I did was ran away to a teacher's house.
Oh, mm,
And and it was quite a ways from my house.
mm.
And police, neighbors, they
Oh
were
yeah.
all involved. They were all looking for me. And I can remember being dropped off in the driveway by the police. And again, it's really interesting to think this, but he didn't ask me, why did you run away?
Mm.
Isn't that interesting? I
That
mean,
is like,
today they would have done that. They would have
oh,
tried to get down to the meat of why this child is on the run. But
yeah.
they didn't ask me. They just dropped me off and left. And I don't even remember them walking me up to the door. Maybe he made sure I got in. I just think that's the weirdest thing that nobody was asking me if I was okay. So yeah, he dropped me off, and the only thing that happened was I was labeled that
Mm-hmm.
kid who
Mm-hmm.
needed attention. You know what? Another thing happened was many years later, one of the teachers he was my science teacher in seventh grade during the same time period. And I ran into him at a reunion, and he said to me, I was like, oh, hi, and he's like, oh, I remember you. You had a lot of problems.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, can you believe that that's what he said? Like, how
Yeah.
many decades later, so many years, and he still didn't say something like, yeah, we thought you were having a hard time. How did things go after middle school? Something more like that instead of like, oh, yeah, you were the one. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel the same way. I feel, you do like I ran away as well. And yeah, they don't ask you. They're like, no, I mean, it was like, there are
Can't you see
reasons
that we're
why.
crying out for help? We were
Yeah, well,
crying out for help.
yeah, and no, and right, and nobody asked. They think that, I know my mother had portrayed to everybody that I just didn't get my way. So that's why I
Mm,
was running away.
mhm,
And I think that's
mhm,
sad because there are a lot of times where you're right, people don't run just to run. There's always
mhm.
a reason behind
There's
your
something
running.
going on.
Always, always.
Yeah.
I had tried to take my life in eighth grade, and I was brought to a shelter for runaway abuse and homeless youth, and it was it, it wasn't attention seeking, and my mother made it out to be that I was only looking for attention.
Hmm.
And she did that several times. When I ran away, that was exactly the same thing. It's just for attention, where
Yeah.
it's like that's not true. It's you're screaming out. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to be this heavy thing for us when we're looking for these connections. It's yeah, I
It can be
wasn't.
really small, like you always say with your 30-second moment.
Yeah.
And when issues aren't resolved as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
it leads to bigger issues as a young adult, which
Oh
can
yeah.
lead to bigger issues as an adult, which could lead to more abuse. And, I drank a lot
Mm-hmm.
because I just kept trying to numb. I mean, they thought that
Yeah.
I had a drinking problem, but I really didn't. Well, I did, but it was a numbing problem. that was my problem. Wasn't
Yeah,
I an alcoholic? I thought so because it ran in my biological family. And
yeah,
I really just wanted that feeling all the time. But it after after I grew up and I grew out of that, I realized that I could have a drink and it not really take me under. I didn't have to keep going after that. But it was just interesting that it was seen again as if it was my thing. I was the big problem, what I needed, versus some people around me. It could have
yeah.
really benefited if all of us worked together.
I did a little bit about that too, the numbing of everything. And, currently right now I started therapy again because I wanted to figure out what was like why I'm so stuck on, again, because I don't think that there's an age limit on these things where you're seeking connection. And so
Yeah.
I am like trying desperately to, I mean, I have my own thoughts of why I look for the connections because when you didn't have them and these certain different categories of connection. Like you don't have the mother connection, you don't have a father connection, or you don't have, a spouse. I have a spouse, but you're still trying to figure out why you need this, why you need this,
Mhm.
especially like as an adult, I was trying to figure out why am I so obsessed with trying to find a connection to have. And I
Right.
think a lot of people don't talk about that because, you figure, oh, when you're an adult, you can stop seeking that.
Well,
Right.
the people that don't understand that are the people that always had the
Correct.
connections. And I
Yes.
think that I almost see ourselves like with all these holes in us. And here's
Hmm.
the mom hole, here's the dad hole,
Yes.
here's, whatever holes you want to fulfill along the way from birth all the way up through, the nurturing part and all that other
Yeah.
stuff. And to me, I just see like a ton of gaps where the air
Yeah.
was just going through
Yeah.
me, and we're still trying to find those things to fill those gaps.
You don't have the things that for me when I think about the gap, the holes, I wondered how it would be handed down to my kids. You
Hmm.
don't have that connection as your own self. How do you make that connection with somebody
Yeah.
else, especially your
Hmm.
kids? How do you make that connection? I have
Well,
a
I know there were people that didn't
yeah.
think that I would be able to be a parent. I know that.
Yes. Yeah.
But I am a kick A parent.
You
I
are.
am. I am. And I put my kids first.
Yep.
I did with my first two, and I do with my three littles now. And I swore everything that I do is for them. And I swore that I would never be like the parent I had.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, you don't want like I don't want my kids to seek my attention. I feel like if we have the connection, then they don't need that attention from somebody else. They don't
I don't
need
want them to, right. I don't
yeah,
want them to seek for that mom outside.
correct.
And, I'm very familiar with reactive attachment disorder.
Okay.
I'm very familiar with reactive attachment disorder. And it is a thing. It ends up as an adult, if it's not really taken care of and the attachment isn't taken care of as a young child, it can
Yeah.
turn into borderline personality disorder and all these other disorders when they're older,
Yeah.
come out in all kinds of different ways. If you do, it is critical
Yeah.
that attachment is formed as a child.